The Marquis de Sade went down in history as the founder of sadism and philosophy, which does not limit human freedom in any way in obtaining bodily pleasures. In his actions and beliefs, de Sade did not take into account either the law, religion, or even morality. His name became synonymous with pain and humiliation. The Marquis himself went through years of imprisonment, was a fiery revolutionary, and even witnessed the execution of the French king. In this issue, you will learn the story of the life and death of the Marquis de Sade. Donatien Alphonse François de Sade, this was the full name of the Marquis. He was born in 1740 into a family of wealthy hereditary aristocrats who ruled the eastern provinces of the French kingdom. Thanks to the efforts of his mother, he entered the inner circle of the young prince his own age, with whom he often played. But at the same time, the prince himself was completely uninteresting to the Marquis. However, it was the prince who played a key role in the life of the future sadist. One day a fight broke out between him and the Marquis. We can say that the prince did not beat his hospitable friend, but he also got it in return. As a result, de Sade was expelled from Paris, and he spent most of his childhood in the castle of his uncle, who was the abbot of a Catholic monastery. According to the Marquis's recollections, most of all he loved to be alone in the dark dungeons of his uncle's castle. There, left alone with his fear, he experienced feelings that influenced his future life. By his 10th birthday, Donatien returns back to Paris, where he enters the Jesuit college. As you can see, the conflict with the prince became the starting point for the Marquis's upbringing in harsh Puritan morals. But, as often happens, strict upbringing did not find a response in the heart of the young Marquis, but, on the contrary, pushed him as far as possible. By that time, there was a split in his family, and his parents were forced to divorce, which was another blow for the Marquis to his Christian faith. Subsequently, de Sade would become one of the most ardent opponents of the church. By the time of his 14th birthday, the Marquis received a church education and entered the cavalry school. 2 years later, the 7 Years' War begins, into which all of Europe turns out to be drawn. The Marquis himself does not escape a similar fate, who, being a green cadet, is called to the front with the rank of junior lieutenant. For military services, he receives the rank of captain, but after the end of the war, disillusioned with military affairs, he resigns. In Paris, the former officer de Sade begins to lead the ordinary life of a young aristocrat of those years. Having achieved the favor of the president of the French tax chamber, he marries the eldest of his daughters. Marriages between noble persons are personally blessed by Louis XV, but then some psychological changes occur in the Marquis's life. The exact cause of this fracture is difficult to determine. Perhaps de Sade's overly strict upbringing as a child was to blame, or perhaps he turned out to be indifferent to his young wife. One way or another, the Marquis begins to lead a riotous lifestyle. Every night he visits various dens and places of entertainment and also tries to enter into a romantic relationship with his wife's sister. Ultimately, one night he drinks himself into oblivion, shouting blasphemous things. The police who came to the call found Marquis surrounded by many prostitutes. Such a scandal for such a high-ranking person could not go unnoticed. De Sade was placed under arrest at the Château de Vincennes, and then sent to Normandy, to his wife's relatives. Only after a whole year, the Marquis received permission to return. The year of return coincided with other good news for Marquis. Due to health reasons, his father abdicated his post, and therefore de Sade, by right of inheritance, became the royal governor in the eastern provinces, gaining enormous power in his hands. A couple of years later, de Sade the elder dies altogether, transferring all his property into the hands of his dissolute son. In his new position, Marquis continues to lead a riotous lifestyle, but this time he has a certain immunity to police actions. However, one day his luck runs out. The Marquis is being sued by 3 girls at once, with whom he indulged in depraved orgies in the most horrifying forms. They claimed that de Sade had mixed their drinks with a powerful aphrodisiac. that is, a substance that enhances sexual desire, which subsequently made them all sick. The Marquis was afraid of the trial, and although he was unlikely to face anything serious, he decided to go on the run with his faithful servant. This behavior caused great public outrage and convinced the judge that Marquis was indeed guilty. He was accused in absentia of poisoning and sodomy and was also sentenced to public repentance, followed by beheading and burning of the corpse. At this time, de Sade was hiding in Italy. Along with him was his wife's sister, with whom the Marquis still managed to start a whirlwind romance. But even in Italy, de Sade turned out to be true to his convictions. Not content with either his wife or even her sister, the Marquis enters into promiscuity, engaging in perverted forms of love that involve pain and humiliation. As a result, by personal order of the King of Sardinia, de Sade and his assistants were placed under arrest in one of the fortresses. The kind heart of his wife, with whom the Marquis invariably acted unbearably cruelly, does not allow her to remain indifferent this time. She helps de Sade organize his escape. Once free, the Marquis goes on the run again, but this time he returns to France and secretly from everyone, locks himself and his wife in one of the remote family castles. Fearing possible arrest, de Sade did not leave his castle for more than a year, but then he breaks down. The Marquis kidnaps several peasant girls, rapes them, and kills them, and then, without stopping at what he had done, he hires several maids to work in his castle, whom he subjects to the most cruel perversions. Fortunately, they manage to escape, all except one, who decides to stay with the Marquis voluntarily. Her name was Caterina Trial, but the Marquis himself called her Zestina. It was to this maid that he dedicated one of his novels. However, the kidnapping of peasant women and the abuse of the maids leads to a loud scandal and again puts the police on de Sade's trail. This time he ends up in a real prison, where there is no luxurious life and beautiful women, to which the Marquis has become accustomed. Therefore, he finds solace in his own imagination and begins to actively write stories filled with the most daring and outspoken fantasies. He spent about 12 years in prison, and the place of his imprisonment was the legendary Bastille, a fortress in which state criminals were kept. It was here where most of his works were written, including a book called The 120 Days of Sodom, thanks to which the Marquis entered literary history. Here he creates his own philosophy, in which he places the freedom of the human person above all norms and laws, including the personality of another person. This is the concept of absolute freedom, which does not take into account anything in the way of satisfying one's egoistic desires. In 1789, the Great French Revolution began, and one of the main goals of the revolutionaries became the very Bastille in which the Marquis was sitting. Besides him, many leaders of those who disagreed with the royal power languished in prison in this fortress. As a result of the assault, the fortress was destroyed, and the prisoners, including de Sade, were released and rehabilitated by the authorities, who did everything to hold out with all their might. Upon release, the Marquis changes his name to Louis Sade and joins one of the revolutionary groups. However, even after 12 years of imprisonment, Marquis remains the same. He quickly finds himself an influential mistress who provides him with money and a position in society, and then having achieved what he wanted, he simply forgets about her, having met the young and beautiful actress Marie Constance Renal, who will become his lover for the rest of his life. Being a revolutionary and possessing great eloquence, the Marquis quickly became the chairman of the revolutionary group known as the Peak Section. In 1793, he served as a juror on the revolutionary tribunal that sentenced Louis XVI to death by beheading. He achieves that all royal sanctions are removed from him and his family, and then leaves the revolutionaries and devotes his life to the theater. But de Sade's old crimes were so monstrous that even the new name of a non-revolutionary connection did not help them to be forgotten. That same year, the police arrested Marquis again and were about to execute him, but by a lucky coincidence, the very next day after the death sentence was pronounced, another coup occurred. Robespierre, who was responsible for the previous uprising against the king, is himself sentenced to death, and de Sade is released again. His further life turned out to be unremarkable. As a marquis, he was included in the lists of so-called outcast aristocrats, from whom all their property was confiscated and they were deprived of the opportunity to apply for high positions, and the works that the marquis wrote in prison, due to their explicit content, could not get into print, and de Sade, in order to survive, was forced to work in little-known theaters for mere pennies. The only consolation in his life was the same actress Marie Constance Renaud, who gave de Sade her love until the last days of his life, which he spent in poverty and ended his bright life in a godforsaken hospital for the mentally ill. Thanks to everyone who watched this video to the end. To find out about the latest releases, you just need to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. Also, leave your thoughts in the comments and give it a thumbs up. See you soon.